Welcome everybody who's here. Matt Harder, Minnesota Wild strength and conditioning coach, is with us today. Thanks, Matt, for being here.
Thank you for the invite. Appreciated.
Yes, very much looking forward to this. I'm John Lally. I'm with Pivot Sports and North American distributor for Firstbeat Technologies. I'm trying to set up my screen in the most effective way for this, making this Q&A available, but small. Okay, guys, so let's kick this thing off. What we're talking about today is the NHL, National Hockey League. I believe, and I just want to welcome people from all over the globe. We had hundreds of registrants, and I hope we have hundreds of participants. We definitely encourage questions. Matt and I want to have kind of a free flow, a good discussion. We want to basically deliver some insights and some anecdotes and really kind of drill down to Matt's methodology for utilizing Firstbeat, specifically TRIMP, our internal load metric, and weekly TRIMP sum, our acute training load, internal training load measure with the Minnesota Wild, and looking back all the way to 2014 when Matt and I met when he was with the Tucson Roadrunners. So that's
2016.
2016.
Yeah, 16.
Okay. I always want to extend how long we've been working together, but we'll keep it going.
Yeah, it's all good.
So the title is Recovery and a Mountain of Data, and you guys listening will learn about this reference to a mountain of data. And having said that, I'm sure many people out there have their own mountain of data that they've built their methodology upon. But really, what I hope to do is bring you guys some insights from Matt's experiences. So let's advance here. Now I can't advance that. Okay, here we go. So the flow, we're going to do some introductions. I started that a little bit. We're going to talk about an Atlantic article by Joe Smith, January 12th of this year, which really brought to light some of the things that are effective that Matt's been doing with Firstbeat data in terms of understanding internal player loads and weekly TRIMP sums. We're going to talk about that mountain of data, which has allowed Matt to come to the point where he is now in his professional application of Firstbeat and sports science. We're going to talk specifically about TRIMP and how Firstbeat delivers TRIMP data. And we're going to talk most importantly, probably about communicating data and how Firstbeat helps Matt in his day-to-day coaching practices with players and with coaching staff. And we're going to do some Q&A along the way. All right, Matt. So give us a little background on your professional career thus far.
Absolutely. So obviously I'm the head strength coach for the Minnesota Wild currently. I did my undergrad and graduate school at the University of North Dakota. I started out as an athletic trainer and then kind of merged more into strength and conditioning as my career's gone on. After graduate school, I got a head job for the head athletic training and strength conditioning job with the Manchester Monarchs in the ECHL. I went to Tucson after that in the American League as the head strength coach and assistant athletic trainer. I worked there for 4 years, and this is where I really kind of started getting into a lot of the using Firstbeat and figuring out what it is and how to use it. I was the assistant strength coach for the Arizona Coyotes for a season. Last season, I was in Iowa, which is our minor league affiliate in Des Moines, Iowa. And then, like I said, now I'm up here in Minnesota.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, as you can see, I have a wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. Busy house.
Right on.
Yeah.
Love that. All right, let's okay. A little bit about Firstbeat. For those, I'm sure, let's hope that many people who are listening have either used Firstbeat themselves and with their teams or their athletes or their own personal use, or have a friend or a colleague that that they know and have learned something about Firstbeat and what we do. But Firstbeat is based in central Finland in Jyväskylä. Funny little backstory for me. I've been going to Finland since 1996. I was a javelin thrower at Berkeley, and I slung my javelins over my shoulder in 1996 and went over there and did a bunch of competitions. And, you know, sure enough, you meet people. And now I ended up, and I've worked with Finns for, almost 20 years. So I love the country, love the people, love going there. Uvascula is a university town, a very strong physiology, sports science university there, where a lot of my colleagues at Firstbeat did their studies. We have over 1,000 professional teams, 23,000 plus athletes, hundreds of publications, and a very strong database, physiological database, which gives us a backbone for many things to come, and many strong analyses and lab accurate data. One thing I'll highlight too, what we really focus on at Firstbeat is staying true to internal load and lab accurate, reliable internal load data. So from training effect on the anaerobic side, training effect on the aerobic side, TRIMP, which we're going to talk a lot about today, training impulse, which models blood lactate accumulation curve. It starts at 0 and goes up with intensity, and the higher the intensity, the faster the TRIMP goes up. These are all key data points that we deliver. Another big part of our offering is heart rate variability data. So 3-minute quick recovery resting measurement that gives you heart rate variability and readiness information. So that's a little bit of background on Firstbeat. Let's see here. Now, January of this year, I hadn't even talked to Matt in some months, and this article came across my radar, and I shot it off to Finland, to Veli-Pekka, my colleague there, and he wrote back, "This is gold." So what I want Matt to do now is the article is basically, and this was the actual title of the article, Matt? Why do the Wildcats rarely?
I think so, because that's kind of how it came about. Was how I understood it anyways, was, so we have our practices open to the public. And when I first got hired here, like, I met with our head coach and just kind of discussed like how I do things and what I've done in the past and everything. And I told him, like, I'm a big proponent of recovery, especially in season. And he's the same way. Like, he's not a huge fan of morning skates. And like, we had discussions that he thinks certain hockey teams practice too much. So we're kind of on the same page of offering the ability for players to recover more often. So how the article came about was the public was kind of, I don't know if they were complaining or just made a comment about, like, us canceling a handful of practices, like, up through the season up till that point in January. And Dean got asked about it, and he did bring up, like, that we have discussions about it. And so the author of the article, who works here in Minnesota, we just kind of had a conversation. He asked, like, what I do, and as you can see on the right, like, he's noticed that players wearing heart rate straps during games, during practices. Like, they see guys wearing them when they come in and do, like, the media after practice in our locker room. So we just kind of started talking about that and why we make the decision to either cancel practice, or at least the information I give to our head coach of certain guys having days off or not days off. So that's kind of how it all began and stemmed and developed from there.
That's awesome, man. So let me just ask you this straightforward. Did you like how the article turned out? Were you, and did Coach Evison like how everything was portrayed, or was that a good, portrayal of what goes on and how it works?
Yeah, I thought it was, like, a pretty accurate article. Like, Joe didn't say anything different than what we had talked about. I don't even know if Dean read it, to be honest.
Yeah, sure.
But
Yeah.
I mean, our relationship didn't change after, so I imagine it was just fine. But yeah, so, like, we can kind of go through some of this stuff. So, like, how it kind of works, like, on our end, and we'll kind of dive into this, is how I keep track of like, individual day TRIMP, weekly TRIMP on a rolling 7-day average, not just like a Monday to Sunday, but we'll go Monday to Sunday, Tuesday to Monday, Wednesday to Tuesday. And I keep track of all that. So whether it's after a game or at the end of the day, if we have a practice coming up, I'll go through our system and check to see just kind of where guys are at, what the next week is going to entail. And if we have a handful of guys that are high, like, and how I deem high is either close to 1,000 or over 1,000, then I'll just send Dean a text or pop in his office in the morning, and I'll say, like, hey, we have this many guys are pretty high in my opinion, and they could benefit from some recovery. These guys in the middle, if they want to practice, great. If they want to take the option for practice, like, no big deal. And maybe we typically will have like a couple players that are on the low side. If it's guys that are not been in the lineup a ton, like if they've been scratched a lot and not playing, or not practicing a ton, just depending. So I'll say like, hey, maybe we can get some extra work for these guys too, whether it's on the ice or off the ice.
Okay,
So
perfect.
yeah. So again, the goal, and like Firstbeat, you guys kind of have like that 1,000 metric is like the high load on the like on your platform, and it's it's pretty accurate. Like that from all the data that I've collected, like typically the average weekly load, I forget off the top of my head, I think it's like 840. I just had it written down here. So 840 is the average of our average for the team, if that makes sense.
All positions, all
Right.
players.
And so then like I'll look at like certain player loads too, right? Like each individual guy has their own profile that I've built out separate through what Firstbeat does, but and we can get into that as well. But so yeah, I'll kind of look through that, and if you can kind of see where certain guys trend, what's normal for them, what's not normal for them. And if they're high, like I'll pop open that discussion. And having this information allows me to, I've always said this, and I think it's really important, is I'm not going into his office or engaging in a conversation with my opinion about anything. I just say, look, this is the information we have. This is what I see. This is what we know about information. If someone works out too much in a week, like you're going to be fatigued, you're not going to recover properly, percent chance of injury goes up, chance of illness goes up. Like you can only do so much. So we know that there's reasons behind what we're doing, and then I just give him the information. And thankfully he's a really receptive coach, and he's respective and everything. So ultimately I just say, look, I'm just giving you guys the information. You guys are the ones who are going to make the decision, but I'm just providing you with the info that we have. And it's not my opinion, like I'm going in saying, well, I think he needs a day off. I'm just saying these guys are high. If you look at the numbers, it would be better for them to have a day off.
Well, that's interesting. I like that because I think a couple things that pop out to me about the article and some of the quotations, is the big one here. Number one is communication between coaches, players, and strength and conditioning staff. Not that long ago, strength and conditioning staff might not have been included in that sentence, but now more and more, as you guys spend more time and have more input and the ability to make inferences from data, then you're being included more in this daily conversation. The other big one for me is this number two, Dean Evison trusts the data. So that's kind of what you're talking about. The key thing that you highlighted, Matt, for me, and I'd love to hear what some of our participants think, is you're not going in there with an opinion. You're going in there trusting some metrics that you've collected and that you've leaned on for a number of years, and you're giving the staff the ability to make inferences from that data. So that's a good way of approaching it to keep things smooth and keep things working without, as you said, going in there saying, I think this, or this is why we should do this. It's much less, I guess, absolute than that. What do you think? Yeah.
No, absolutely. Because you'll go into those meetings and you'll say what you need to say, and sometimes it's quick and they're just like, okay, thanks. Other times it opens up a conversation for something else, right? Like I might go in, this has happened like multiple times, and just say like, hey, like I think this guy, could benefit some recovery. And inevitably, and thankfully, honestly, it didn't happen this season, but inevitably in my time, it'll be the middle of the season and a coach will say, hey, what's up with this guy? Like he's out of shape. Like what's going on with him? And I got like tired of hearing that from coaching staff. It's like we're in February and we've played, however many games by that point. We've been practicing, skating 6 days a week. Like there's no way someone who exercises at the way that hockey players do is quote unquote out of shape. So I got tired of like not being able to like combat that question without any more things than just their opinion of them being out of shape. Because it also, like, I don't know what they mean by out of shape. You know, like
Mm,
you could look at a marathon runner and you look at a power lifter, they're both in high level physical fitness, but it's completely different. And you know, hockey,
mm,
like there's hockey shape, obviously, but like I don't know if they mean he's slow. I don't know if they mean like he looks like he's fatigued in the third period. I don't know if they mean like he's not strong in the corner. You know, those are
mm.
all different aspects of like what hockey shape could be. So that really kind of sparked a big reason why I really started diving into a lot of this data was like I wanted to be able to go into a meeting and if they say like, hey, he's out of shape, be like, well, you know, his strength numbers or his power numbers haven't gone down with what we use to measure it. He's recovering well based off of like looking at the reports in between shifts or in
Mm.
between periods. Like he looks like he's recovering well. Or if on the flip side, it could be like, well, hey, like he's not recovering that well. His training load's really high. He's probably fatigued, which is why I think he could benefit from some rest and recovery. So,
Well,
like,
that's a key talking point. Sorry to interrupt there, but
yeah, go ahead.
so then bringing in to another option there, which is it's not that he's a player, as you said, it's very hard for them to fall out of shape or out of condition when they're skating 6 days a week, but it's very possible that he's fatigued. So you're
For
bringing
sure.
in that option and as another possible idea to
Yeah.
approach and to solve. So
Absolutely. Well, here, can I just go back quick? I just wanted to touch on, so
yeah.
like between, that's where we try to keep the guys between like 500 and 1,000. And a good like analogy I've liked to use is if you think like when you're on a road and you have rumble strips on both sides, like if someone gets over 1,000, like if they're going and they get close to 1,000 and they start hitting that rumble strip, like I don't just hit the brakes, pull over and park the car. Like we just make minor adjustments and get them back in the road, right? Or if they're on the
Mm,
flip side, 500, like we don't absolutely bury them the next day, but we just make a minor adjustment. We might go up, you know, or aim to go up like 10 or 15% of what their average training load is for like the next 7 to 10 days to try to build that up. But
mm.
it's so I like that of like, you know, you don't make major shifts or just pull the car into the ditch. Like you just make a minor adjustment and self-correct. And it's just trying to keep the guys individually going down the road throughout the season and then the team as a whole, because a lot of the stuff we do is team-based, right? Like they might just cancel practice totally and it's like, oh well, geez, like there's a couple guys that I wanted to skate today, but now we have to
Right,
make an adjustment.
right.
And then for like the 850 like average trim, like it's pretty much what you see. And another analogy I liked is like if you're racing a car, like and you're at your max RPM, so like for race cars, like 7,000 RPMs, like you can only hold that for so long before inevitably something happens. You overheat, a gasket breaks, you know, piston rod snaps, whatever. So that's I try to tell players and tell coaches like, look, we're we're really pushing things to the max, like what we do in pro sports, and we're trying to redline as much as we can, but we also like we got to downshift every now and then and let these guys rest and recover so
Mm,
that when we get to playoffs, like playoffs is a different story. Like, yeah, we're redlining, like we're going hard and it's we're gonna go as hard as we can. And that's like the end of the season, yeah, we'll redline it. But up until that point, we try to be a little bit more strategic with it.
I like that. Yeah, strategic is a good way of putting it. I have an old friend I used to work with, who is a top cyclist. He did race across America, and he invented spinning and all sorts of crazy endurance feats. Johnny G is his name. And he used to say the way he'd put it, the same exact kind of analogy, Matt.
Yeah.
I have a question for you about the your analogy with the what do you call them, the
Just the
noisemakers?
rumble strips, yeah.
Yeah, but I'll get to that in a minute. But Johnny G used to say, look, we all have a certain amount of change in our pocket at the beginning of, let's say, a season for you guys. And you got to decide when you're going to spend that and how much you're going to spend along the way. Because when you empty that change purse,
Yep.
it's going to be very hard to dig into that pocket in, as your example, in the playoffs, if there's no more change to spend. And that's just about balance and about, as you said, now every now and then we've got to change it up, create a different stimulus, so that when playoffs come, we can go into that change purse, dive deep, and have something there to spend. But to these analogies, are these some? Would you use those analogies when you're speaking to players and coaches, or
Oh
is that
yeah.
just
Like that. Yep.
okay?
Like,
Cool.
and that's why I feel like if you can come up with whatever analogies or comparisons that like that makes sense to just normal people when you're explaining something like this. Because like if you say that, like, the rumble strips are just trying to keep guys down the road. Like we're not
Yeah, I
making
love it.
vast like I'm not going to go in the office and say like, hey, we all need to have off today, right? But I can say like, look, the team's pretty high as a whole. We got a couple guys that are really high. Like, I don't know what you have planned for practice, but let's, try to keep it light. Or like you being up at practice, like watching certain players, and if they come to the bench for water and maybe practice is done, but there's always the practice after practice. I'll be like, hey, why don't you like get off today and go focus on some recovery and things like that. So I think when you can have digestible analogies that makes sense, like it helps people understand like what you're talking about.
Okay, cool. All right, let's move on and let's talk about the
Yeah.
title, part of the title of this webinar, this discussion. And I'm noticing here, let me just pause for a minute. Let's pause for a question, Matt, from
Yeah.
Trevor Goldstein. Thanks, guys, for sending in some questions. This will be super fun. Trevor says, I've noticed TRIMP is very specific to the person. Some run hot, some run cold normally. I have a guy who has a low TRIMP regularly, does not get to 1,000 TRIMP, but may start to be, Trevor used the word overtrained, but I'm just going to substitute in there fatigue, because overtrained is quite a serious deal, and I hope he doesn't get there yet, but he shows some fatigue or shows some, lack of the ability to perform at his highest level. How do we find the number for those that are not that norm of 1,000? What do you think about
For sure.
that?
Yep. So I like the 1,000 mark. I think it makes the most sense. I totally understand what he means, because you do have guys who are, and I don't know the exact reason for it, but like their heart rates are more responsive. Their heart rate increases faster when they start exercise. They're able to, or their heart rate maintains higher during certain exercises. And then you have guys that are just low, like, and I think that's just, I guess I don't know the exact reason why that is, but if you can look at someone's information over the course of a long period of time, you really understand like what's normal for them, what's not normal for them. So like for him, if you have certain guys, and Trevor, I guess I don't know what you do, but like if it's let's say like for a practice, like our average practices, I think are 77 TRIMP. So if you have a guy who always practices and hits like 120 or 140 every time he practices, but then you have another guy who's always in like the 30 and 40, like you can just know that and understand that. And then you get an idea of like, all right, if he practices and he's typically around 120, and maybe a game is for him is always at like 250, then you can look at a schedule and or like a weekly schedule, like, all right, we got 3 games here. So he's going to be at 750 and 2 practices. So that's another 240. So that's, 990 if I'm doing math right off the top of my head. Like that's kind of a typical week for him. So then you can go, okay, like that's fine. If he's right around there, great. And if it's, no issues, no big deal. And another thing I really like to do too is like when I see guys that are high, like in the system, and we'll go over it soon, like I always go and touch base with them. Like they'll come in, they'll be rolling out on the floor, and I'll just like, hey, how you feeling lately? Like, do you feel tired? You sore? Typically everyone has some sort of past injury. And what I've seen a lot too is when guys get high, like those past injuries start bothering them. So I'll ask like, how's your knee been, or how's your shoulder been? So if a guy, like you're saying, has a high TRIMP all the time, just keep track of that, watch it, talk to them, see what's normal. If you do anything else for like monitoring or testing, whether it's like jumps or force plates or any type of like strength measurements, we'll encompass all those things too. And I'll be like, hey, like, we looked at a jump, or your grip strength is down a little bit, or whatever else. Like I've used Gym Aware in the past, and you can say, hey, it's a little, like you've gone down a bit and your training load's high. How are you feeling? And you just kind of go from there. Like it's not always like, oh, they hit 1,000, they're done.
Right.
Like that's not the case at all. And again, once we go through the system that we have, I'll kind of explain that as well.
Yeah, we dive into that methodology a little more specifically, but to summarize, I think your point, Matt, is that you have a basket of guys that let's say they're more sympathetic dominant.
Sure.
They run hot, whatever.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
you explained it perfectly. They get there fast, they stay up there. That's just the way their physiology is, right? But the key is who those guys are, and you adjust their ranges accordingly.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I'll say this for maybe not for Trevor, maybe you're aware of this, but for new Firstbeat users, before we start communicating cumulative internal load values such as TRIMP or training effect, we have to make sure that the athlete profile is correct. Most importantly, we want to make sure that the maximum heart rate on profile or for that specific measurement is accurate, because if the max heart rate says, for example, 185, and this person is going to 188 all the time and hanging out up there, then the TRIMP and the training effect are going to be exaggerated. Remember, the system will adjust for any new max heart rate found, and moving forward, it will be accurate according to that new data point. But just be aware that sometimes you have to reanalyze measurements or adjust max heart rate in the early going before you have a clear and accurate idea of the maximum heart rate, so that those calculated values are correct. So just new users, be aware of that. And as well, look at the activity level. That's important as well.
For sure.
We'll get to another couple of questions, but let's move on here. So we're diving into the methodology. We're starting to understand TRIMP and weekly TRIMP sums. And that's a great question from the field there to kind of hone in on, people that don't fall into the normal ranges. But Matt, give us a little bit more on these images here to give people, what's going on here? And
Yeah, so this was we had just started talking about like doing this webinar and everything, and I've moved 3 times in the last 3 years. I've been with 4 different teams in the last 4 seasons, so like I've moved a ton and had, it's moving sucks, but we were talking about like giving some visuals for the presentation for the slides and everything, and I was out in my garage just going through like some totes that I hadn't probably unpacked in like 2 years from moving, and came across this was just like a tote from my old desk. I think it was in Tucson, but obviously it has like different books and things in it, but these were just tons of game reports. I mean, this is probably, I remember my last year in Tucson, we had tons of guys wearing it for games. I think we had like an average of like 12 guys every game wearing monitors. So, I think I collected like over 1,000, well, for sure over 1,000 games in my time in Tucson. And obviously like put all that data into Excel to try to see like what's normal and not. But yeah, it's a stack like this big, and like I can even show this. We were just talking about this. Like this was Iowa, and this is all just game data from Iowa. And you don't have to like print these things off. I like to, just so it's nice to look at. I like having something physical to look at. If a player pops in your office, you don't always have to just go to the computer. Like you can look at certain things, but going through all this information is essentially how I've come up with all the information that I've had or have, and then it helps me, project into the future, if that makes sense.
And Matt, I have a question that's kind of very interesting to me from a personality standpoint, from a player and strength coach relationship standpoint. So how many players on the Minnesota Wild wear Firstbeat for games, and why do you think those players do and others do not? Get into that a little bit. And let me just
for sure,
background for all our listeners. In the NHL, you cannot mandate that somebody wear heart rate monitoring devices or any monitoring devices during the games. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, that's how I understand it, is you can't make it mandatory,
right.
But if it's player optional, like, and that's how I present it to the players. Like I just say like, hey guys, look, like this is a system we use. I get a lot of quality information from it. I just use it to try to help you guys, which again, I think that's a big thing to try to tell the players and to follow through on, is like, the information I'm getting from you is just to help you. Like one of my years in Tucson, I'm not gonna be too specific, but we had a coach who would put the like what we see on the iPad. He had me link it up to the Jumbotron during practice, and then if certain players didn't reach certain, he liked to look at calories, which we don't need to get into why he liked that, but if certain players didn't reach certain burn calories for practice, he would just sit and have them skate laps until they burned these specific number of calories.
Boot camp. It's just a boot camp. It's just
so like, it got a bad taste in some players' mouth. Then they're like, well, I don't want to wear this because it's being used against me, and like we had a player who was one of those really low guys, and he would look at the practice data, and then he would confront the player and be like, hey, you didn't work hard during practice today. And it's like, that's not what this is. This isn't a effort thing. Like we're looking at specific, like you said, physiological markers based on that person. Like it's not based on like how hard you work. Like if a player is very efficient on the ice, if they're a very efficient skater, their heart rate data is going to be a lot lower than someone who's really not an efficient skater. Like, I guess, yeah, you could say,
Absolutely.
did they work
Absolutely.
harder or not? Like, that's not what we're looking at.
Right.
That's not where I come into play, is like who works hard on the ice.
That's a huge point, right?
Yeah.
And I always say I'll just add, like when I'm doing QRT with the Detroit Red Wings in training camp, for example, I remember all these times, or just looking at training effect or TRIMP after a hard workout. This is all like in camps in preseason in the summer, and young guys would come up to me and say, "Is that good or bad?" And so I
Exactly.
was like, it's like, there is no good and there's no, it is all good information. So let's start there. Clear your minds. Nope, not good, not bad. Because the second we get into that, then you're going to have these guys that are concerned or worried or freaking out, or they don't want to, there's no bad data. It's just information that we can
It's just
use
information.
to make you better. So then they start their eyes light up, and they, it's you have to start from that positive reference point. And then but I like, that's a great example of the Jumbotron and calories. I haven't heard of that one before. Years ago at Buffalo, when Doug McKinney was there, we did training effect scores and the TRIMP scores on Jumbotron. And I'm with you. It was like, you get a lot of this stuff, guys looking up and being a little worried and like, where am I at? And coach starting to use it just to create sort of the biggest disturbance possible. And
but to go back to your early questions, so like this season we had, I think, 9 total players wear it in game. So that wasn't every game that 9 guys wore it, but I would say every game probably around like 5 or 6 players wore it this season. So, and again, it was a good mix between forwards and defensemen. I think we had like typically 3 forwards that would always wear it for a game, and we had 2 defensemen who always wore it, like they never didn't wear it. And then you'd get the couple guys that would wear it sometimes, not wear it others.
Talk to me about what makes those 5 or 6 or 7 or 9, maybe on the best day, where, like, what do you see in their personality that draws them to the information, Matt?
I think they're interested in it. Like, they'll get the reports whenever we download it. They get that information. I know a lot of the guys honestly like looking at the calories so that they know, like, how much food to eat for dinner for like the following night. That's what they've told me anyways. Other guys, I think it's just it's feedback, and it's honest feedback. Like it is what it is. So like, I think guys like to just see that and see, hey, what was my game like? Like they'll look at a report and sometimes they'll text me like, oh, did you see like that? Like I got double shifted like that during that big red block. Like that was when I got
love that.
double shifted. Or like, oh wow, that was when I got in that fight. Like, look how high my heart rate got during that fight. So
it's
like little things like that.
It's like a new language. Like they're seeing, oh, look, I love that. They're connecting what happens on the ice physically with their physiology, with their body, with their effort, with their movement, to a language, which is a chart or data or points or numbers. That's cool. Okay. All right. So let's pause here. Well, no, I'm going to go over TRIMP real quick for you guys that are listening. And then we're going to take another question. So TRIMP, as we've been talking about, is training impulse. And I'm just going to read this. I always say to people when they're starting with Firstbeat, and I've hundreds and hundreds of times, coaches, strength and conditioning coaches have asked me, what's the best value to communicate to our players and our coaching staff? And I always say, start with the values that you understand. So if that, in the very beginning, when you're using heart rate monitoring, and let's say we're looking at a practice, if that's average heart rate as a representation of the overall intensity, then start with average heart rate and then build into the other values that over time, with the mountain of data, start speaking to you. So for you, Matt, the big one has been TRIMP, training impulse. You just mentioned calories for some players, because some guys are really dialed in to calories in, calories out, and that's okay. That's what they're, and for me, that's a very simple, the calorie thing is a starting point, because on every package everywhere, in every food store and every, co-op, whatever, is a caloric information value. So we're familiar with that. But anyway, TRIMP, training inputs, allows you to measure how hard you trained. The Firstbeat method quantifies the intensity and volume of a training session on the body in a cumulative, that's a key word for TRIMP, it's a cumulative training load. Starts at 0, goes up with intensity. And I'll let you roll with this, Matt. Starts at 0, goes up with intensity. Talk to me about, because you've said this, you and I have had this discussion over the last years. I want to know how much time over 90% of max heart rate, what that means for TRIMP, how much time your guys spend, and use any, we can talk games, we can talk practice, we can weekly, over threshold, anaerobic threshold, 85% of max heart rate, approximately. Some guys are going to be a little higher, some guys are going to be a little lower. But tell me about TRIMP per minute with those relative intensities, so our listeners can kind of get a feel and gauge these color-coded values at the bottom of the slide here.
Yeah, for sure. And just like being quite forward, like I don't look at intensity a ton. I will with certain practices, like I'll look at the intensity, but so yeah, so obviously like with TRIMP per minute, like it gives you an idea of how, again, how hard a certain session was based if you're looking at time, right? So if you have 20 minutes and TRIMP was 50, right? That's good. That's a hard 20 minutes. If you have 20 minutes and TRIMP was 20, like pretty moderate, right? So it gives you some insight on what to look at for that, right? But I mean, all of our days are so structured that the times are all the same. So I don't look at a ton of that, and our practices are never really too long. So like, I don't really influence like how certain drills in practice or certain intensities of practice. But so if we're looking at like the TRIMP per minute for the intensity, that's, again, I use that, and we can discuss this later, but how I've come up with my like estimation formula for games for guys that don't wear it in a game. So if you know like what a certain activity is like, then you get an idea of like, okay, like a hockey shift, I've rarely seen it where a guy won't go above 90% during a hockey shift. So average hockey shifts, I think we had this year, I had some of this written down. It was like 51 seconds, I think, is like, 51.5 seconds is our average shift of all the players that we had this year. So and if you know that they're above 90% for essentially that full 50 seconds, then you can understand if they play, 20 minutes, what a TRIMP would be like just for their time on ice. And then you can understand what like a TRIMP would be when they're recovering in between periods, or what certain like exercises that we do off the ice are. And then the more you look at it, the more you can understand like how intense certain things are or should be, if that makes sense. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah, and just I think you touched on it there. Like if an athlete is and I just wanted to get some hockey specific stuff. If an athlete is at 90% of max heart rate, we're looking at 3.5 TRIMP per minute.
Right, right.
Yeah, you touched on it when you said, if you're at 20 minutes with 50 TRIMP, we're at 2.5 TRIMP per minute. That's getting pretty hard.
That's probably like sitting in your 80% almost the whole time, or you have like a lot of like interval training.
Yeah, I want to get to some questions. And here for the sports scientists out there, we use the Bannister method for calculating TRIMP. We do have a unique piece of our algorithm that when the heart rate is low, under 55% or 60%, that the TRIMP doesn't accumulate much, because we didn't want to see at a very low recovery level heart rates the accumulation of TRIMP changing that total value for the workout. But here's the TRIMP equation for people that are interested. So you can lean into that a little, learn about that.
Well, here, I'll go back just a second here, John. So for how we do it, and what I tell our guys is like, when you get to the rink in the morning, throw your heart rate monitor on. We have them hanging in all their dry change stalls. So I just tell guys, like, get to the rink, put it on. When you go to shower at the end of the day, take it off, hang it up. So that way we encapsulate your whole day. And like you said, like if they're in like their 50% or like resting zones, like if they're eating breakfast, like no one's going to be above 100 beats per minute sitting and eating breakfast, like, none of these guys. So like, it's not like if we're getting that data that it's going to really skew what we're really looking at, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I
Yeah.
always
So
say to people, put the heart rate monitor on when you want and understand that it's just capturing everything. It's still valid data.
right.
Let me take a few questions for you, Matt, to keep
Sure.
people
Yep.
engaged a little. Let's see. Do you measure TRIMP during off ice workouts also? And do you measure the
Yes.
TRIMP for every drill during on ice practice to help plan practice?
So for the first one, yes, like I was saying earlier, we tell guys to put it on and wear it on the ice, off the ice. You know, like a lot of the training that we do, um, like if we're doing like a circuit or if we're like lifting pretty heavy, like you'll get a good heart rate response from from the lift. You know, so if we see a guy that, you know, maybe I didn't want him going over 100 trimp today, and he comes off the ice from practice and we have a post practice lift and he's already at like 130, you know, I might adjust what we're doing in the gym a little bit to counteract that, right? And like we're doing off season training. I have the guys wear their heart rate monitor during our off ice workouts, and then obviously through their off ice conditioning. The conditioning is like a no brainer. It's because like right now we're doing certain zone training. So like today, I just had guys be in an 80% of their max heart rate for 4 minutes, rest a minute, and then go back to 80% of their max heart rate 3 times. So
Hmm.
we just have it on our TV screen in the gym. I just say, you know, pick whatever implement of like whatever equipment you want, but get in that 75 to 85% range, stay there. And if you want to rest and then go back to the same piece of equipment, great. If you want to go to a different piece of equipment or run or whatever, do that. So it's very, we
And
use it in that
what was
way.
the work to rest ratio again?
Well, for today, we were just doing around 80% for 4 minutes and then rest a minute and then do it again. So we're accumulating 12
Cool.
minutes in that time. Where
Right
like our
on.
previous phase, we were doing longer duration, lower intensity training. So we were saying be above 65%, below 75%. We ended up getting up to like 25 minutes by the end of the that training phase. But now we're going up intensity. We're doing not intervals, but like similar
Yeah.
intervals. We'll increase it. We'll increase the amount of those that we do, and then we'll, as this summer goes on, we'll increase the intensity, but then decrease the time in between. So it looks more like when we're doing conditioning, it looks more like what we see on the ice for
Right.
game
Cool.
day.
That's interesting. Here's a
Mhm.
good one. Then we'll get back to some.
Well, here I'll answer this part. So,
Yeah.
no, I don't measure it for every drill. Um, you know, I'm not included, and it's not a bad thing. Like I'm not sitting with the coaching staff and we're like planning out drills, or I have like this drill is this trimp. One, I don't think our staff would be super receptive to that.
Hmm.
And you know, and it's not a thing against them. They have things they want to work on. They have things that they want to do, and certain time like drills will change sometimes. And you know, I'm not going to tell them like, hey, pick this drill, pick this drill, pick this drill based off heart rate data. And again, our coach he's really good of like, if he wants to have practice, we keep it short, pretty hard. Like we rarely practice over 30 minutes. So he'll pick just a handful of drills, that things that they want to work on. And then I just look at the feedback I'm getting from the internal load from the players. So, you know, I don't sit with the coaching staff and say, oh, well, I think this drill would be good because, you know, it's worth X amount of trimp or whatever.
Hmm.
And we can
Okay.
piece together a practice. Like I know I've heard of people doing that, but
Right.
I've
Right.
never done it. And I don't know. I've just never done it, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Interesting. I've definitely heard of people trying to do that as well, but again, it goes back to what's going to work with your team and with your philosophy, with the philosophy of the staff. And if you don't feel, that's going to be effective, then that you can't go
Right.
there. Let's do one
So
more
there,
question because
yeah.
did you see one you like?
Well, just the is more performance based. I'm curious if it has any relationship to preventing chronic injuries. I mean, I guess I can't statistically say like this is what happens, but anecdotally, I'll tell you this is whenever I see players that have had post injuries or post having injuries, like whether it's shoulder repairs, hip repairs, knee repairs, or if they've had you know, just any type of injury like strains or sprains, whatever. But when guys start getting high load, I've noticed those guys start to complain of like these chronic things like, oh man, my hip's really bugging me today, or like inflammatory type issues, like guys that have had knee surgeries, like they've been like, oh God, like my knee's just really been bugging me the last couple of days. And I'll go back and look and I'm like, well, yeah, your training load, you've been over 900 for like the past 6 days. Like, let's try to relax. Let's try to improve some or promote some recovery, whether it's like, instead of maybe the workout today, we'll do some mobility, sauna, cold tub, make sure you're eating good. Like it opens up those types of discussions, right? So to answer that question, not specifically, but for sure it does.
Okay. Let's move on. And then Sam, I saw Sam used the raise hand feature. So I promise we'll get to you in, let's say 5 minutes from now, because I want to get to some of Matt's really critical game data from Minnesota Wild. And before we do that, I want to introduce that by when I posted the post for this webinar on Instagram, and when Firstbeat created it, we had this comment from a buddy of both of ours, JP Major, former head strength and conditioning coach for the Arizona Coyotes. He wrote, "This guy is elite." That made me psyched because I know that you've worked with JP for a number of years, and this was as it relates to Firstbeat. So he's giving us a great comment, both in regards to you as being an elite strength coach, but also to your ability to use Firstbeat. So my question is, let's go to that comment. This guy's elite. How has Firstbeat helped you be an elite strength and conditioning coach in the NHL?
Well, I think he was being very kind by saying that, but well, it's information to me, like, and I use it in a ton of different ways, like how we're kind of saying, like it helps me be sure of like the decisions or the communication that I'm engaging in. Having these numbers and having this data to look at, and then you can see a trend over time. And then, like I said, when you go into a coach's office or having a conversation with a player, I'm not bringing my own opinion into it. It's just like, this is the data we have. It's very objective. It's not my subjective thoughts. This is just what it is. So if a player's got a really high training load, like that's it. Like he's got a high training load, and that's just what it is. Or if someone's really low because they haven't been playing a lot, and I'll communicate this to certain players if they're not in the lineup a lot, like, hey man, like your data or your weekly TRIMP numbers really fallen. Like we're in the low 500s, 400s maybe. Like we got to start doing some more work, whether it's on the ice or off the ice. But let's pick a handful of days in the next 7 to 10 days, and like let's try to get some higher quality work in. Or if we're doing conditioning on a game day, maybe they already skated in the morning, but we're going to do extra conditioning in the evening because maybe the morning skate wasn't that challenging for them. Then I can tell that to them, like, look, we're going to do some intervals today where you're going to be hitting 90%, getting down to 60%. We're going to do 12 of those, and the reason we're doing that is we're trying to just get your training load up. And a reason for that too is I've seen over time, my time in the American League is always the best players from the American League get called up to the NHL, right? But then they're not the best players in the NHL. So a lot of times they'll get called up and then they don't play a lot. So we'll have guys in the AHL, and again, this is my own experience, that are playing 20 minutes a night, 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week sometimes. And then they go up to the NHL for 2 weeks, and sometimes they don't even get a game in. And maybe the morning skates aren't that hard for them if they're getting bag skated on the ice, or they're always probably working out, but maybe not doing as much like conditioning. And they'll come back down, they'll play a couple games, and they'll be like, holy shit, like I feel like I don't have my jump, or I feel exhausted. And it's like, well, yeah, you went from exercising a bunch to not exercising as much as you're used to, back to exercising a bunch. Like your system's not adapted or just adapted to it.
Well, that being said, I want to get to this because this is a very good question that pertains to exactly what you're talking about from Laszlo. Laszlo says chronic training load does not have an effect on your decision, ? Only acute training load. And his point is, so if your chronic training load is, let's say, high, 900 to 1,000, shouldn't that mean that the athlete is adapted to high load and can push them slightly over that 1,000 acute level? So what do you think about all that, Matt?
Yeah, for sure. So look, if I would, if anyone has access to the like a heart rate monitor, specifically Firstbeat, where you can track TRIMP, like try to get to 1,000 in a week. It's so hard. Like it's really hard. Even if you're doing it a long time, like if you're doing it for 6 months on end, like these guys do in season, it's a lot for your body to do. Like it's just you're spending a lot of time in an elevated heart rate zone day after day, week after week. And yes, these guys, they are
Great point.
adapted to it, but at the same time, like I'm going to go back to that red line analogy, is like, yeah, they might be adapting where you could maybe push it a bit, but you're still pushing it, and that's
Mhm.
where I use first beat as one major variable for me, but we're looking at a lot of other things too. Like, and we're
Mm,
talking specifically about first beat today, but like I'll talk with the players. We'll look at other like data that we're collecting, and we're trying to piece it all together to see what's normal, what's not for that player. So yeah, like if the chronic training or if the acute training load is or how do you say it? So if your chronic training load is close to
high.
900 or
Yeah.
1,000, that doesn't mean that the athlete is, yeah, you could push them a little over 1,000, but just also know like all the other things that are going on with that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and the theory is if you look at Tim Gabbitt's work on acute to chronic, that I think Laszlo, you could theorize that that's okay because they've built up their capacity to be able to sustain 900 to 1,000. So therefore, can you push them beyond that? Sure, but
Yeah.
let me just say that in the case of an endurance athlete that might have, I'm thinking of my good buddy Tom George. If he has a race once a month or once every other month, or he's looking out to world championships, he might be able to do that kind of approach.
Hmm.
But in the National Hockey League, when you're looking for a big performance every other night,
Every other night.
it's a little bit different than
Yeah.
maybe preparing in that same way to keep pushing that ceiling higher and higher and higher and capacity higher and higher and higher. Let's look
Right.
to maintain a really good, efficient, steady level that we can go 82 games, whatever. Is that right? 82 games in the
Yep.
season.
No,
Yeah.
100%. But also, Lazo, like we do look at acute to chronic workload ratio. So I look at a 28-day weekly average and then the rolling 7-day average, and we compare the two. So we'll go through this when I show like a snapshot from where we kind of put and look at all the data. But we do look at a acute to chronic workload ratio. And when I first started to get into this, that was one of the numbers I kind of focused on more than just the weekly trim. But I've figured out that the weekly trim is a bit easier to manipulate, I guess, because you'll have like the acute to chronic workload ratio is a bit volatile, I guess, with how I do it with a 7 to 28 day, like a 1 to 4 ratio. And I've
Mhm.
looked at like 1 to 3s, 1 to 5s, and like, it's shaky. But so yeah, we'll look at that in conjunction with like, all right, if this guy's had a high training load, acute training load the last 3 days, and is a chronic or his acute to chronic workload ratio is also high, and then talking with the player, looking at some other data, some other things match up, then yeah, we can make those decisions. Like, and we can project into the future, like, all right, we can try to push it a little bit more because you will get that adaptation over time. And that's we can look at that acute to chronic workload ratio. And I'll go back to that when we get to that slide.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to turn you loose on
Yep.
explaining to the people what hockey, and again, some of you out there probably monitoring hockey athletes, you might be familiar with these training reports from Firstbeat. But Matt, I want you to break these down for us. But before that, Sam, I promised you to get to your question. It's a little off topic because it's not really heart rate and TRIMP related, but I still want to get to it. And so he says to you, Matt, at what age can an athlete start strength training, in your opinion? How can we tell if players are tired? So that is a good one that's related to
Mhm.
heart rate, TRIMP. And then is strength training specific to each sport? That's also specific to hockey. So what do you think about those three as quickly as you can fire away at those, Matt?
Well, one, I guess it just depends on what you mean by strength training. Like my kid's 4 and he does jumps off of his playground in our backyard. Like you could call that a depth drop, right? Like
Yeah,
he does
love it.
jump. So like, it depends on like what you mean by if it's using certain weights, like, you know, he'll pull the wagon around the yard sometimes, like that's kind of like doing like a sled pull, right?
Mm,
So I think you can exercise with kids as soon as they're able to move, because when they're playing on the playground, they're moving. I probably wouldn't do any like weightlifting with kids maybe until they're, I don't know, a little bit prepubescent, post prepubescent, like really loading weight. But even then, like it's probably fine. Like I used to work with younger kids, but you can do so much like just focusing on good athlete quality movement, you know, jumping, running, changing of direction, balance, coordination. You know, those are all things that'll help. How can you tell if the athlete's tired? Well, one, you can talk to them and ask them, how do you
mm,
feel? That's always, I think, really valuable because they'll tell you if they're tired or not. And then two, like you can just look at if you're able to collect any information on guys of what their normal, whatever, if it's, let's say, like vertical jumps, grip strength,
mhm,
weights
mhm.
lifted, you know, if they're able to do something for a long period of time and then now they're not able to do what they're used to be able to do, that's probably a sign of being tired. And then is strength training specific to each sport? I mean, yeah, you can obviously focus on specific things like, you know, wide receivers need to do a lot of off ice sprinting and jumping, or not off ice, but off the field sprinting and jumping in their training. Like hockey players, you know, we work on a lot of different hip mobility and hip strengthening because hockey's so specific. The hockey stride's so interesting and specific to the hips that like we have to address that. So yeah, you can for sure train for each sport.
I heard a funny quotation the other day by Wayne Gretzky. He said during the Stanley Cup, he said, you know, we all ride the bike so much. We all rode the bike so much. And I used to ask the guys for my entire career, why are we riding the bike so much? Greg LeMond doesn't skate on the ice to prep for the Tour de France.
Yeah, well,
So
that's
there is some, you know, some non-specific training elements that also play a role in all of our lives, I
yeah,
guess. And
for sure,
that
for
was a
sure.
funny one. All right, so why don't you
Cool.
take us through a training report and what you see, what you use from these reports, Matt.
For sure. So these are like obviously two different reports here. I'm just moving this question bar out of the way. So the one on the left, this is like a really typical game. So I mean, if you remember back from the post, our average TRIMP game, I just have it written down here as well. So average is 215 for a game. This guy's at 209, you know, super close. So you can obviously see the little bit of raised prior to the 3 blocks, like that's the off ice warm up. They
Mm-hmm.
come off, Zamboni's going on. First period is really evident. So you can see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this player had like 6 shifts in the first period. And I'll look to see like, and like I was saying earlier, they're getting above 90%. That's what you see when it hits the red. This player's recovering really, really well in between shifts, getting down below to 50% of his max heart rate. He's recovering well in between the period, and each period looks really similar. During the periods, you know, they're either, well, these periods, they're pretty much above their 60% of their max heart rate for the whole period. So like those are things that I'll look at. And go to the other one. Well, here, so this TRIMP's 209. So this next game is 264. So a little bit higher, and I'm almost positive I sent, these are two of the same guys, or these reports are the same player. I'm almost
Yeah.
positive I sent that to you. So same thing, you can see off ice warm up, but then on the ice in between the first intermission, like they didn't recover as well as maybe they did the game before, or even what they did in the second period. Third period looks like they got a lot of shifts, but it's great. So that's I'll look at these reports after games, and you know, it sparked conversation. Like I've seen reports where guys don't recover below 70% during intermission. So I'll ask them like, well, what were you doing during intermission? Like, were you like busy doing something? Or are you not recovering well? Like, how'd you feel? So that's opened up conversations of doing like different breath work techniques to try to like get them to calm down and recover in between those intermissions. Because if you think about it, like their heart rate's elevated. Yeah, they might not be exercising per se during the intermission, but their insides are working, their heart's working to whether it's refuel their muscles or whatever the reason the heart rate is elevated during that time. So like those, if we go back to that other question, like that might be indicative of, oh wow, that player's tired. Or like if I
That's
see that they're
huge. The
not,
breath
yeah,
work, yeah. Every little thing, every element now is going to contribute to this third period. What happens here? How is this player able? Look at this last shift on the first chart. This
yep,
last long shift, it's the highest peak. By the way, really interesting too, the training effect is a 4.0 on the first game where the TRIMP was lower.
yep,
So something stimulated, and it's this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shifts in the third period of the first. So anyway, I'd like to explore that if I were in your shoes too, like the bigger training effect, lower TRIMP, lower
hmm,
training effect 3.8, higher TRIMP. Very interesting there. But I think the key, like you said, is what's happening during recovery periods. What can we do to improve those recovery periods in between the periods and the shifts? But
yep,
some of it too is dependent on the game. Like if I look at the second chart, the second report, Matt, this player, he only had 4 shifts in the second period.
yep.
And you can't control that. He can't control that. That's a coaching decision, and that's what it is.
Right, right. Absolutely. So I'll touch on a couple other things too, like well, if we go back to like the game, so like I like looking at, yeah, we'll keep it here. So I mean, over the course of like however many games I've looked at now, the average the average heart rate during a game is 62%. So I think of that and I go, okay, a player, they need to have the ability to have their heart rate elevated above 60% of their max heart rate for 2.5 hours. So like that's just baseline. They need to have that ability. And like, try doing that. Try sitting on a bike for 2.5 hours, keeping
Mm,
your heart rate at 60%. It's not overly challenging, but it's challenging enough,
yeah,
like you can't,
yeah,
but then now increase um these intervals. So time above 90%, the average was 11 minutes. So like the game on the left, 9 minutes and 38 seconds, game on the right, 12 minutes and 23 seconds. So you can say like, well, on average, each guy is going to have to spend each game above 11 minutes in their max heart rate zone. And again, like just try to do a workout where that's really hard to do, right?
yeah.
And then we go back to like um the other heart rate zones and times. Like it gives you a good idea of what the player's cardiovascular system has to go through a game. So just looking at that information, that's helped me develop like our conditioning protocols for the off season. Like I was saying, first week or first phase, we're just doing low level, that 60 to 70% max heart rate, long conditioning, because we're just trying to lay that base down, because that's what these guys have to do. Now, if we go like when we're doing interval training, I'll have guys, you got to hit 90% of your max heart rate, and then we're resting to 60 or 65, and we're going to hit it again. And how you develop that is, well, that's what happens. They get above 90%, they rest down to, I mean, at least typically 60, but that's what the average is. Then if we repeat that, we're just kind of condensing periods or what they're going through on the ice.
Awesome. Let's take a couple questions and
Oh,
start to
sure, here.
wrap things up, guys. We're gonna go a little over. We're at just an hour now, so we're gonna go a little over to take some questions and finish up a couple slides. Couple quick ones here. Let's see. Sazba, Robert Tarnai. What is MHR? That's maximum heart rate, the
Right.
maximum number of beats in a minute that an athlete's heart will go to, and that's individual. There are all kinds of formulas to estimate that. We start with a ACSM formula to estimate that based on age, but then the Firstbeat system will adapt the profile and take any new max heart rate data that's found and put that into the profile and use that. It's very important that the max heart rate be accurate. If an athlete has a low max heart rate, you have to be aware of that and move that down in the profile yourself. Jared, so Matt, you answered this: acute training load, rolling 7-day TRIMP. Do you have to run a report to get weekly TRIMP? No, we give you that, but Matt, you also do your own analysis, I think.
Yeah, so I basically told our coaches, like, look, I'm not gonna waste your guys' time with good information. If guys are high, that's when I'll tell you. Like, I'm not gonna come in the office every week if everything's looking good. Like, the only time you're gonna see me is when I'm gonna say, hey, I think we need to make a decision. Like, I don't want to go in there and say, hey, everything looks good. Here's reports for everyone, because most of the time the coaches don't read them anyways. So
Mm,
I've done that in the past. Like, I shouldn't say that. Our coach last year, I would type out a report and give to him, and he liked to see that. But he was that type of guy. Like, he liked to have it and look at it. But for the most part, it's just verbal conversation.
that's that's really cool. Like, you don't go in there for the status quo discussion.
Yeah,
There's no time
yeah.
for that shit. Yeah. You
There's
go in, you've
well,
got
that's
some,
true. There's no time for it. Like, we're
yeah.
so busy in the morning. The coaches are busy doing stuff. Um, yeah, there's just no
You
point in
know,
going in there to say, hey, everything's
yeah,
good.
I've often said that too. And for people out there starting to use heart rate monitoring or Firstbeat or internal load metrics, it should make sense. And that it goes back to all of our discussions, whether it's return to injury or that great example, Matt, you gave of players getting the best players in the AHL getting called up to the NHL, then their whole experience changes. Then they come back and things don't make quite as good sense as they did a few weeks ago. So
Right,
heart rate data should make sense with what a coach like Matt, who's dialed into the day-to-day, sees and feels and communicates. It's when there's a change, a shift, that you start to have to make a communication or open the discussion with the staff to know why, and to now adapt what we're doing to support that change in the player's experience. So that's big. So I want to spend a few
yep,
minutes here because this is kind of the
yep,
crux. I talked in the beginning about methodology. I talked about inferences from the data. We've talked a lot about TRIMP and weekly TRIMP, heart rates and max heart rates and peaks and valleys and recovery. All of those things are a language that is presented by Firstbeat and relied on by Matt and the Minnesota Wild and many teams out there. But Matt, let's get into your methodology here for the next 5 minutes, then we'll wrap up.
yep.
And this page outlines your methodology of incorporating all those things to be able to then communicate effectively with trust and move in a direction that is inferring from the data.
Right. So this is a page, I built out, I guess you could call it a system through Excel. And the only reason I did that was because we have guys that won't wear it in a game, whether they think it's uncomfortable, or we've had guys say like, oh, I get checked and like the monitor hurt my chest, so I don't ever want to wear that again.
Mm.
Or they're just like, I don't want to have to deal with it falling off, whatever their reasons are. So we'll have, good amount of guys that don't wear it in a game. Well, if you look at the Firstbeat system, then it shows up as like a no day for them, and it really skews all their other data. Or if guys forget to wear it during practice, which happens a lot, or just refuse to wear it. So I developed this system to account for that. So if a guy doesn't wear it during a practice, I can look at the team as a whole and either assign him an average for the practice, or if the positions were really different, forward versus D, or goalies are always really different, then I can get an idea of what the average for their position was, and I'll assign that for them. So on the left is obviously the date that we're going. The B column, that's their daily TRIMP. The C column, that's their chronic load. So I have that 28 days total divided by 4. So it's the average week in the last month. And then D is the rolling 7-day average, or the rolling 7-day total. And then the E column is the acute to chronic of D to C, essentially. So, and you can look at that. And also what I found, like there's some research that says like 1.5 is kind of the threshold for acute to chronic workload ratio. I don't think I've ever seen that, except maybe coming out of like Christmas break or All-Star break, and it'll just spike quick and resettle down. So what I have found is like 0.8 to 1.2 is kind of like a good window. So you'll see, like if we go to the left, November 19th, he's at a weekly acute load of 1,039, and he's at 1.2. But then we had the next 2 days off. Then it was a pretty normal practice, pretty high game, practice game, but everything seemed to kind of mellow itself back out. So, and I don't know, I forget if we recommended a day off because maybe he was high on the 20th or something. But also the reason I built this out was because I had all the averages of games, practices, those types of things. So I can now, well, like when we get our schedule, I'll go in and I'll self-populate all these days for the team and for individuals. So then when I go back in and type in their actual data, I can go ahead and look like the next week. Like maybe this player had 3 really high games. Like if we go down to like December 7th, so 273 high game, 259 high game, and then the back-to-back game lower. And we can touch on that too. Back-to-backs are always lower. That was a huge thing that was super surprising to me. I thought a back-to-back, the TRIMP would be higher, but it's always, well, not always, but it's pretty much on average, I think it was like 10% lower. But anyway,
That's
so you can
interesting.
see,
Yeah,
so then you can
that's
see like
great
he has a
takeaway.
big block of high loads here. A couple pops off at 1.2 over 1.2 a couple times. So we'll try to, manage that on the back end. And I always say, like, I don't like I shouldn't say I don't like it, but when people talk about like we're managing workload, it's, yeah, we are managing workload, but I'll never tell a player like, hey, they're not going to play in this game because their training load's high. It's my expectation for the players is I expect you to be able to play 82 games a year, and we are going to practice, multiple times through a week sometimes. So whatever that is, like my major expectation is, look, you're going to do everything we can so you can play those 82 games. And then if we have to adjust practices or workouts, that's when we're going to adjust. Like I wouldn't want to hold a player out of a game because he's going into a game at 1,000 TRIMP for that week, if that makes sense.
Right.
So yeah, so then
likes hockey so much.
yeah.
In-game load management in hockey.
Right.
And yeah, there's going to be fatigue throughout the year, but what can we do with those hours away from the rink, those hours that might be hard skate on a day that might be a recovery day? I'll go back to your head coach's comment. He uses recovery, or maybe this was your comment, Matt, as a weapon.
I think that was what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Which it is, man. It's
yeah, I love that. I think we've gone into this in depth. I hope we've given some insight into the value of communication and how Matt, because one of the most intangible qualities, every guy, every strength and conditioning coach that I've been around has to have a certain ability to communicate effectively and well. It's not the kind of job where you bury your head in data and spit out reports and shoot things around. And you have to be the conduit to the players and the coaches. And the better you are at that, the more players you'll influence and the more coaches you'll influence. So I think we've gone into that in great detail. Matt, do you have any other keys to your success when it comes to communication? And
no, I mean, it's kind of like I've had conversations with players where like their training load's really high and we have a practice and I'm like, hey man, like I think you should rest. We can do like a light bike, do some mobility, try to boost your recovery. And they're just like, look, I want to skate today. I got new equipment. I need to break it in. There's some things I want to work on the ice, so I'm skating. And like you just have to have good give and take, and you can say, all right, like, well, try to keep it light. And sometimes they don't, and it is what it is, and you try to manage those as much as you can. But
it's a mentality.
For sure have to.
Yeah, and that mentality is important for their success as well. So it's like everything, it's just a piece in the greater picture of this puzzle of performance and of playing hockey at the highest level.
Right.
Maybe we have time for Matt. Do you see any questions you want?
Yeah, here, let's go through the questions here. So well, we answered that, the report to the coach. It's typically just in person, or I'll shoot him a text.
I think I'll answer this one from Tar and I. Firstbeat differing from Training Peaks. I think, well, CTL, I don't know if that's a measure. That must be a weekly sum measure that Training Peaks uses, and maybe we can answer this offline, Veli Pekka, my colleague. But essentially, Training Peaks will pull in data, so you can pull in any data you want into Training Peaks and look at it. So I think maybe the best answer to sorry if I'm not getting that name correctly, but is that essentially what Matt is trying to do in his Excel utilizing Firstbeat data, or what we're trying to do with our weekly TRIMP sum is create a better understanding of internal load over a time frame, and Training Peaks is pulling in data to deliver comparable information in their way. What else?
For sure.
Max
I'm just
heart
scrolling
rate.
down here. So is
Yeah.
acute load, rolling 7-day TRIMP. No, yeah, so it's a rolling 7-day TRIMP. I built out. Sorry.
The max heart rate is always on profile, Michael Sheridan, so it stays there until it's updated from a new data point, a valid data point that's not artifact. And it will apply to all forward training sessions until it changes or you change it on profile. The only time you have to reanalyze and manually input it is if you want to go back in history, like for a new athlete. If we get a new guy in, Matt gets a new guy, comes up from the AHL, he doesn't really know much about him yet. Let's say he's brand new to the team this year in the summer. He'll get data on this athlete in the first couple of days of training, and he'll start with the theoretical max heart rate. The system will update for any new max heart rate. But if he wants to go back to a session from last week when the actual max heart rate wasn't accurate, then you have to put it in and reanalyze it. And that can be very valuable in certain situations when you want to understand a training effect or adjust the TRIMP for that weekly TRIMP sum. You have to go back to historical data and reanalyze. And
Here's a good question here. So from Adrian Chalens, I think is how you say it. So it says, do you collect heart rate low in the morning before practice? How and when do you determine heart rate max? How do you handle TRIMP for players who are not playing? So yeah, we just tell them to, wear it in the morning. Sometimes we'll work out before practice, so it's not like we're keeping their heart rate low before practice. But yeah, I guess I think that's how you're trying to do, collect heart rate low in the morning.
Well, and I'll add to that too, Matt. Adrian might be, I mean, that's a great point. First of all, when you say you work out before practice, you're talking about weight training before practice.
Sometimes, yeah. Not all the time, but some guys will, yeah.
And that's a whole nother discussion there, and that's positive in many ways. But Adrian, I mentioned the QRT, quick recovery, 3 minutes resting. That's for heart rate variability, for a readiness score. And so I'll throw it to Matt. Matt, have you guys done much with the QRT, the readiness, the HRV?
I tried earlier, like when I first started doing it, and it was just tough to get guys to do the 3-minute recovery score at certain times of the day. And I've been meaning to figure out a way to try doing it more often, or at least we were talking how you can look at their recovery from the sessions, recovery. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was looking at doing that, but yeah, I used to try to do a 3-minute, everyone laying on the ground, just being chill, but it's so tough to get everyone together all at one time. It's and
very useful information, but it can be in this time frame and in the busy schedule of the few hours you have them. Yeah, to be a challenge. And Matt, I think you went into depth on how you handle the TRIMP for players who are not playing or wearing. Yeah.
So typically, our average day that we record is 120. So if a player's not playing in a game that day, between their morning skate and skate on the ice and our workout and maybe extra conditioning off the ice, I typically want players to hit over 100 for sure. But if they can get over 120, that'd be great.
You're gonna create that stimulus for them in the gym.
Right. So if they skated earlier that morning and they were on the ice for 45 minutes and they had a 90 TRIMP for on the ice, then when they come back for the game, if we're going to work out during the game, I'll say, hey, all right, we got to get 30 TRIMP between our workout and any extra conditioning that we're going to do. Cool. And I'll be like, that's, and then I'll tell them or I'll look at the player's daily average and I'll say, hey, your daily average is 105. Let's just hit that today. That's our metric we're going to hit today, between whatever you guys do on the ice with the coaches, what response you have from the lift. And then if we need to get to 15 TRIMP by the end of the workout, then we'll do that interval conditioning where we hit 90, rest to 65. And I'll just say, we're just going to do that till you fulfill that TRIMP obligation.
Perfect. and I'll let you handle this one too, because I have a lot of ideas in this, but I think in hockey and NHL and pro sports, it's not that hard. How and when do you determine heart rate max?
Yeah.
That's from
So we tried to do it a couple different ways in the past. When we do like our fitness testing, when we'll do like a bike test, like you'll typically get close to it, or we just tell guys like, especially during camp, like, hey, wear your monitor during practice. I'll go back, I'll look to see what their max is. And, typically during camp's really intense. They'll
right.
always get a hard bag skate at the end. So I'll look and see like if guys go over, it self-corrects. If guys are under, then I'll look at it. If it's way under, like if I have a heart rate max of 195 for someone and I'm watching the bag skate and he's only getting to like 185, but everyone else is like near their max, then I'll make an adjustment there,
Yes,
Um,
especially if that player is performing well, right? Like if
right,
if
right.
somebody's getting their butt kicked, or they're not at the level, or they're young, or they're new, we have to take all those things into consideration. But and I'll only add, I'll add this for people that aren't working in hockey, or have been to a training camp at a pro level. The intensity and the competitiveness is so great that, and this is specifically to Adrian's question, how and when do you determine heart rate max? You don't have to do a max heart rate protocol. All we have
No,
to do is get good competitive on ice data from these guys, couple good days, so that we know that it wasn't sort of an off day for them, or if Matt saw something that was an anomaly in their performance, or they whatever, and we're going to have near max data. And that, when I say near max, I mean 1 or 2 beats, 3 beats. Anything more than 3 beats away from a true max is going to start skewing some of the calculations. So you want to make sure you have a really, really good, hard few days to validate that max heart rate on profile.
right. And if you want a protocol, one that I've found works really well is put a treadmill at 10, put the speed at 10, put a heart rate on the player, say run until you want to get off, or run until you failure, and you'll be pretty close to your max heart rate. Like
I love
typically,
it.
if it's just a
Those
couple
are,
minutes, like they'll get to it in
yeah,
a couple minutes.
that's great. And I love it. And you just have to have a mindset, a mentality that's going to push hard and take that challenge on. I mean, the other thing that I've seen many, many times on the Concept 2 rowing machine, or on the Versa Climber, or any on the Nordic track, any of these modalities, these equipment pieces that are extremely challenging, like that 10% incline, 10 whatever, a
Yeah,
few minutes, you can get to max heart rate, especially if you're fit. A highly conditioned, trained, fit athlete can get to max heart rate very quickly. All we have to do is go back to that game data. You can get to max heart rate on a rowing machine in 2 times 40 seconds, max effort with short rest between. So it doesn't, but it's a mentality too, and it's being fit enough and being able to get through those gears.
right.
So there's a lot in that, but just know that at the professional level, with competitiveness, with training camp, with on ice, in the sport that you love, that you're good at, the heart rates are going to be high and going to be very near max in those environments.
For sure.
All right, let's finish with this. We've hit a lot of questions. Excellent. Thank you guys so much for the really stimulating questions. I hope it helped. I hope you guys have an idea of the method behind all this mountain of data and how it becomes useful, the communication at the highest level in the NHL, what makes elite. So I'll just throw this one to you, Matt. What's next in terms of your utilizing Firstbeat data, and what would you like to see Firstbeat do, or potentially add or create within our offering, our system?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've kind of talked about like it'd be neat to be able to go into those days and plug in like a data point. Like if I could plug in just a custom TRIMP for someone or edit someone's TRIMP, like that would be neat, because then I wouldn't have to have the other system built out through through Excel. That would be
We have the manual session ad. You can add a manual session.
Oh, okay, great. Maybe we did talk about that before.
Yeah, so there is the ability, and maybe, yeah, we can start funneling some of your Excel stuff through Firstbeat, because you just click the plus symbol and you can add manual session. And the whole team will pop up, and you click who you want to add it for. So we can start doing that within Firstbeat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because there'll be like certain days, like a player might wear it for a game, right? And like one of the buttons just kind of comes undone, so it gets just not good data. So it comes in as like a certain session, but it might be only like 50 for the game because it popped off during the first period and he didn't notice it till the third period.
Yeah, we can
So I'd be able to
totally
like,
add that.
yeah, that'd be sweet. I mean, other than that, yeah, I don't know. I use it a ton. I like it. The features that you do have, like the QRT, like, or the quick recovery test, like
Yeah, yeah,
I just got to figure out logistically how to make those types of things work.
yeah.
It's just more of a logistical issue, but
One thing I'll say about
um,
QRT for you as well as the group is you can, you can do it with small groups. I have a number of teams from the Chicago Bulls um, to let's see, some of our NFL teams, certainly many teams in hockey from San Jose to the Rangers. Oh, Carolina, Bill Burnison at Carolina. If you're listening, shout out, buddy. He does it every single day, and it's his way. This was a funny one for me. He definitely wants to see readiness scores, definitely likes to see the heart rate variability. But it's his way of making sure the guys all have their belts on.
oh yeah, it's a good
Does,
it's a good way to make it happen.
and the players come in and say, "Hey, Billy, are we sleeping today?" And
Yeah.
they get to relax. And you hit on it earlier. The breath work now is becoming so important. Understanding whether it's nose breathing or breath holds or a cadence breath protocol. Because you can, I always say the QRT, the 3 minutes is a drill like any other drill. We're drilling on the ice. We're drilling in the weight room. We're training. You can train that 3 minutes and have fun with it. It doesn't have to be just a mindless activity. But my
Right.
point was you can do it in small groups. You can do it for one at a time, a few at a time. You don't even have to run it live. You can just collect the 3 minutes of data and they hand it to you later and you download it and analyze it for QRT. So a lot of ways to get the heart rate variability, the readiness data. And of course, we have the new heart rate recovery tool that shows how many beats per minute off a peak. So their best come off from high to low in a session for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 120 seconds as a percentage or as an absolute value. So that's pretty cool too. Totally
Right.
different heart rate recovery versus the QRT. Totally different. But in one way, they're kind of looking at that ability to come down, let's say,
Yeah.
whether it's in the moment or from the prior day's training load, QRT.
Cool.
Any wrap up thoughts or ideas, Matt? Thank you
Yeah,
so much,
I
buddy.
don't think we the one thing that I just wanted to, whoever else is listening, I guess, we didn't really talk about, but for the game estimation, if there's any hockey strength coaches that are here, what I use for when I estimate our game TRIMP is I'll take their time on ice in minutes, I multiply that by 3.5, and then I add that to the total minute of the game. So where are we at here? I don't know if I sent you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember
so
the
if you look at the top, sorry, I got the chat box covering up. So
yeah.
like average game length is 150.8. So I would just round that up to 151. If the average, or for this, let's just call this a person and this a game. So let's say they played 16.7 minutes a night. So I'd just take 16.7 times 3.5 plus the minutes in game. So I'll just say 151. And that would be a 209 TRIMP for the day. And that's pretty, the average TRIMP is 215. So, pretty standard to what we see. And what I do is I look at the actual data that we get, and then I look at the average, and then I take all the players and I do this estimation, and then I compare the two. And typically it's always within about like 10% of what the actual data is to what we're estimating. So there's obviously error, but it's pretty close to what you can do for the guys, girls, whatever, the players that don't wear the monitors during our big data collecting time is the games. But so that's, again, whoever's else is listening, just write that down. 3.5 times time on ice in minutes plus total game time in minutes. And that's how I estimate the player TRIMP for games.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Matt, for sharing some of your philosophy, this methodology, and the inferences that you make from Firstbeat data. And I hope we at least inspired some thoughts and some direction for some people out there that are starting to use Firstbeat or want to start monitoring internal load. Thanks everybody for listening, for hanging out for this. We went a little bit over an hour and a half, but it was well worth it. I was inspired, I was excited, and we'll hope to hear from all you guys soon.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the invite, John. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who tuned in.
Thanks, buddy. Ciao.
All right. See you later.